Hello, we're gonna start with this presentation, which is based on the telling the story of an image by activity classification, scene recognition, and object categorization document. Um, this starts with the question what, where, and who, which is based on the document telling the story of an image by activity classification, scene recognition, and object categorization, which is uh, which was done by Fei-Fei and Li-Jia Li from the Department of Computer Science at Stanford University, USA. More than one-third of the entire human brain is involved in visual processing and understanding. Psychologists have shown that the human visual system is particularly efficient and effective in perceiving high-level meanings in cluttered real-world scenes, such as objects, scene classes, activities, and the story and the image. What we're going to discuss is a generative model approach for classifying complex human activities. This article is based and focused on sport events such as cricket games, snowboarding, rock climbing, badminton, and so on, given a single static image. So we observe here that object recognition of the scene as well as scene environment classification of the image facilitate each other in the overall activity recognition task. For example, we have this image. What do you see? In the field of computer science, in computer vision, we take some of the features of the image, and for example, here's some description of what we could see. Like most of the picture is green color, while the lower half is light blue, red, or have darker colors. There are also solid edges in the foreground picture, rows of round shapes. There are different attributes that we describe as colored edges and shapes. But the most important here is that this is not how humans communicate on what's on the image. It's not also the kind of description that we would provide to a blind person. So, so more humanly way to say that it would be, for example, when you explain to someone, let us describe it as a rowing event taking place in a lake. The water is clean and blue. Lush green trees stand along the shore of the lake in the background, and a team of women athletes in red vests is training on a rowboat, accelerating to the right. This is something that gives the imagination of a human person more vivid scene of what's going on. And this is the kind of semantic that in the visual world is called high-level visual recognition, and it's part of the larger field known as vision. So similar to object and scene recognition, event classification is both an intriguing scientific question as well as highly useful engineering application. So in this work, we propose to decompose an event into its scene environment and the objects within the scene. From an engineering point of view, event classification is a useful task for a number of applications. It is part of the ongoing effort of providing effective tools to retrieve and search semantically meaningful visual data. Such algorithms are at the core of the large-scale search engines and the digital library organization tools. Event classification is also particularly useful for automatic annotations of images, as well as descriptive interpretation of visual work for visually impaired patients. So our approach, our model integrates scene and object level image interpretation in order to achieve the final event classification. So in this picture we have an example of a game polo, and for this we can say that in the foreground the polo game has distinctive objects like horses and players which are wearing polo uniforms. The setting of this game is usually on a grassland. So by intuition we can say that this event with a combination of scenes and objects we can determine that it's a pole event. So this is what we're trying to do in this model. Try to put all the elements, which is the events, the scene, and the objects that are involved in the scene, so we can make a decision of defining and determining what event are we seeing. And the object of this is not only classifying but also give a meaningful semantic labels to the scene and the object components of the images. We on our approach, we have the first order approximation, which is based on three parts of the images. Number one is the same part of the model. Number two, the object categorization, and number three, the general layout of the image. Each of those are organized differently, but are merged together in the model, so we can take a more holistic way to decide what's the image and the recognition of the event that we're seeing. Here is the integrated model in a graphical way. So we can say that the tags or nodes in the image E, S, and O represent the event, scene, and the object labels respectively. We have an X, which is the observed appearance patch for the scene. We have an A and G, which are the observed appearance and geometrical layout properties for the object patch. And the rest of the nodes are parameters of the model, which will help us later to update them, and we can have a more realistic to the scene model and an algorithm that would make us to improve and fine-tune as we train it. The integrated model is mathematically represented by some set of discrete random variables for the event, which is part of a distribution of the images that are indexed and generated for each one of them. We have an event class that we generate for the scene image of this event, that there are in theory S classes of scene for the whole event dataset. And similar to the scene image, we also generate an object image, but unlike the scene and the event, there could be more than one object in the image. We use K to denote the number of objects in a given image, and there is a total of O classes of objects for the whole dataset. The following generative process is repeated for each of the K objects in the image. These are the mathematical expression of the integrated model, whereas we mentioned O, X, A, G, T, and C represent the generated objects, appearances, representation of the patches in the scene part, appearance and geometry properties of the patches in the object part, topics in the scene part and topics in the object part respectively, and each component are broken in the following equations, where we can see the parameters that involved each of the objects and their probability to occur on the image. Now we have labeling an unknown image. Given an unknown event with a known scene and object labels, our goal is to classify it as one of the event class, which is the what, to recognize it the scene environment class, which is the where, and to recognize the object classes in the image, the who. And we realize this by calculating the maximum likelihood at the event level, the scene level, and the object level of the graphical model. And here we can see the equations of the likelihood of the image given its object class, the scene class, and the event class. So the most likely event is given according to these probabilities and calculated in the likelihood maximum model. Learning the model. The goal of learning is to update the parameters phi, rho, p, lambda, theta, and beta that we have on the model equations for all of the batches that we are calculating. That is the event, the scene, and the objects parameters. And these are done so we can learn the scene related and the object related parameters separately. So there are different methods that we use to update these parameters, such as the the give sampling, or we can also use the variational message passing method to update some of these parameters. System implementation. Our goal here is to extract as much information as possible out of the events, most of which are declarative fields with objects of variable size and multiple categories. At the feature level, we use a grid sampling. So this is the dataset of the images that were collected for this experiment, and it contains a set of images for all the sports that are going to be classified, which are 8 sport events, and they are very different in a lot of features that they have, even though it's the same sport. So we're going to discuss that set in a further slide. The experiments and results. First, we're going to talk about the dataset. As we mentioned, there are sports event categories, which are bocce, croquet, polo, rowing, snowboarding, badminton, sailing, and rock climbing. And the images goes from 137 to 250. And this dataset, as we said here, it's a very challenging one. And here are some of the features difficulties that we found. Whether the background of each image is highly cluttered and diverse. The object classes are diverse. Even for the same categories, the size of the instances from the same objects are different. The pose of the objects can be different. Number of instances are changed diversely, even with the same category. Some of the foreground objects are too small to be detected. But one thing that was a plus here, that we obtain the ground truth annotation for every image in the dataset. So this will help us later for the labeling process. Experimental setup. We set out to learn to classify these 8 events, as well as labeling the semantic context for these images. For each event class, 70 randomly selected images are used for training and 60 were used for testing. And we have three experimental models. Scene-only model, which we use LDA model to do the event classification based on scene categorization. Here we turn off some of the object part of the likelihood model. We also have another object-only model, which is in this model we learn and recognize event classes based on distribution of foreground objects estimate. There's no geometry layout information involved. We can turn on this part. And the object geometry model, similar to the object-only model, here is only the A and G variables, which is the appearance and geometry layout. So, except for the LDA model, training is supervised by having the object identities labeled. As we mentioned before, we use exactly the same training and testing images in all of these different model conditions. So here are the results. The confusion table for the 8 class event recognition experiment. We can see that we have some approximations depending on the sport that was going to be identified, and the average performance of this model was 73.4% of effectiveness. If we would do a random chance, that would be 12.5%. As we see the confusion table, the rows represent the models for each event category, while the columns represent the ground truth categories events. And it's interesting to observe that the system tends to confuse bocce and croquet, where the images tend to share similar foreground objects. The performance comparison between the full model and the three control models that we defined, the scene only, object only, and the object in geometry models, we can see the performance of the full model compared to the individual's one. So our full model is a 72% effective rate, and we can see how the other models performs are poorer, especially the object and geometry model. Well, here we are. This is the observation about the object and geometry model that is performing worse than the object only model, and this is largely due to the simplicity of the geometry layout properties. While these properties help to differentiate sky, ground from vertical structures, they also introduce noise. And here are some results of the experiment with actual images, and we can see the percentage on the image and how is performing the classification. For example, the first one, it's a badminton event, and we're seeing on the second image the objects, which is the athlete on the floor, and we see on the third image the scene determined as a badminton court, and we can see the graph that it's correctly classified, and we can see the different sport events, the ones that have the graphs more on the same height. It was harder to differentiate. For example, for bocce, we can see that there are like 3 bars there that are somehow close. That's why we say that the ambience or the setup for some sports are quite similar, as we discussed before. We had the croquet event, which is very notoriously different from the classification. The pole field. We had rock climbing, for example. We can see how it's only 1 bar on the graph. That is really one graph alone is really easy for this algorithm to separate it from the other events, as well as rowing. We also have this example for sailing and snowboarding. Featured work for this. One of the most important applications is personal assistance to visually impaired or blind people. So this is one of the areas that could help us with the semantic understanding of images that could serve to advance the state-of-the-art system on this domain. And we also can improve real-world applications that require advanced visual recognition tools. For example, sorting and searching tools for large image datasets, like personal photo collections or images on the internet. Our model is, of course, just the first step for such an ambiguous goal. Some conclusions for this: well, semantic interpretation of the visual world is an indispensable functionality of the future generations of artificial intelligence systems. This project aims to contribute to both the scientific questions of image modeling and the technological advancement of visual intelligence. My name is Salvador Flores, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. Thank you very much.